Welcome everybody to this week's edition of the A to Z of Property Strategies with David Clouter. And as you can see, there are zombies all around us. We've dropped into a movie set this week, David. Help! Help! We were up to H's, weren't we, last week? What are we doing this week, David? And just watch your back. If you see anything
with our
coming,
H's.
let's
We've
run.
We've got to HMOs, houses of multiple occupation.
Okay, so what's the strategy with HMOs? Because it's one that I say, boy, you've got to like dealing with arguments about cheese in the fridge.
It is, and anybody moves that cheese, or worse still, if they scuff it, there's trouble. And so that is one of the sort of big issues. And I got into HMOs in 1982. They weren't called that then. So that was the era of a fellow. Do you remember Rigsby?
I remember Rigsby and Rising Damp. That's actually what I refer to when people say HMOs. I go, they've been around donkey's years. Rigsby, Rising Damp. It's always been there. It's just a modern name.
Absolutely, and he lived on the premises, didn't he? So that was quite an extraordinary thing to have Leonard Rossiter as your landlord living downstairs, and then popping up every now and again to harass Miss Jones and all this kind of stuff. Extraordinary things. Back in those days, it was a very different landscape to the one now. So I did HMOs for about 20 years, and then when all the regs came in, now I was always very very, very careful to make sure that all my HMO tenants were protected in terms of fire regs and things. And I went overboard with it, and I was doing things that are not mandated now. Like in an HMO that I had back then, I'd rip up all the carpets, I'll put hardboard down over the floorboards, I'll then spray those with flame retardant, and then put flame retardant carpets back on. So they were very, very, very safe, and I never had any issues in that sense. But then when the regs came in to say the tenants should have this many meters of kitchen workspace and this kind of thing, I kind of lost an appetite for a bit, but I had some good times, and they were good yielding. But there's a lot more mandated regulatory issues there now, and I was helping a good friend of mine recently with her sort of compliance audit. There's a lot to check, so it's a lot. It's a lot more work than your single lets. If you do it through an agent, the buck still stops with you as the landlord in terms of compliance. And there are things like fire alarms. You've got to test them not on the day before the people move in, not on the day after, but at the time of move in. And you've got to get them to sign for it and all this kind of things. A lot of compliance issues in the sort of pandemic landscape that we're in at the time of recording. You've also got to be very, very concerned with this. The person you move in, A, they might have a virus and bring it into the house. B, some people in the house might have a virus. It's very sensitive. You could end up moving one tenant in to a 5-bed HMO and having 4 move out. So there are kind of strategies around that as well. And I think
I'd agree
personally,
with you.
I always found that it was good practice.
Yeah,
Good practice to say to your HMO tenants, have you got a friend who might like to move in? Because that immediately gets away from a lot of the issues that might come along if you're living in a house. And let's face it, if a stranger suddenly turns up, one bad apple can spoil the whole barrel. So that was my way around it, and I think that would probably still be just as effective today. And whether your tenants are perhaps doctors and nurses, perhaps students, perhaps they're blue collar, perhaps they're professional. It doesn't really matter. They're going to have friends, and they're living quite economically and in a sort of cost effective. It's a bit like that TV show Friends, isn't it? Really. So kind of moving friends in is my sort of tip for making the HMOs work a bit more smoothly.
No, I'd agree with you, and it's a bit like Big Brother House. If we've all watched that docudrama type program, and to try and make it interesting TV, what they do is they bring a newbie into the house and then monitor the effects on the other members of the house, and you get the forming, norming, storming phases of the different members moving in. So it's great fun to sort of deal with, and something which I'm sort of hearing from HMO landlords, that they're evolving their properties to almost make them self-contained rooms now, because they predict that self-contained rooms will actually be more robust in a downturn, such as a pandemic like this. Whereas in the old days, people perhaps provided just a basic room with common facilities and thought that the market wanted the cheapest available room. So the market's evolving all the time, and as a sector, HMOs are evolving, as David's quite rightly said, the licensing. And can you remember how many different rules there are for managing HMOs?
More than I've got fingers and toes.
Yeah, from my memory, it was 186 different laws and rules to comply with, and it's like, what? It becomes a legislative and bureaucratic nightmare, and with additional licensing that's now in place, that all of that costs money and erodes your profits. So just be wary.
Yes, and then of course you've got with your self-contained rooms, you've got this band-aid council tax thing, which you made an excellent video about, which I recommend to everybody to have a look at.
No, it was a very good one on how to beat the council at band-aid council tax. A case story with a landlord who actually overturned a band-aid implementation by the council. So very, very well remembered, David.
It's not every day that David wins against Goliath. So whenever that does happen, it's something that we must absolutely celebrate. The next thing that we've got on our list here, we've got a couple of HMO ones. The next one is HMO conversion. So we take a property and we put in all those interconnected mains smoke alarms, and we change all the doors for fire doors and do all the other mandated things. Again, we're all different, so the HMO strategy will work for some people. If you're using a managing agent, you need to be aware that a lot of managing agents don't have the appetite for the extra hassle, and B, those that do will certainly charge you for the privilege of having to run backwards and forwards to the house 5 times more than usual. And so all these things sort of chip away at the bottom line for us as landlords. But assuming you want to do it, that there are builders actually who specialise now in taking a property and making it compliant in HMO terms. It's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be cheap because there's a lot of stuff needs to be done, frankly, and as you say, a lot of regulations that need to be adhered to. Your local HMO officer will often come around and have a look, and they'll give free advice, and they're pleased. They're actually pleased to be consulted by landlords because they know that it's not a rogue landlord and someone who's trying to do it properly. And so you will find a bit of flexibility and a bit of cooperation. A friend of mine, when he got the HMO officer round, the fellow said, "What are you going to do with the garage?" So he said, "I've got no plans for that." So the council's HMO officer ended up renting the garage to keep one of his classic cars. So that's a good way to stay on the right side of the law, if you like, and sort of work with people. But it's a team, it's a cooperation between public and private. It's providing a vital service at a time when the barriers to entry to property at the bottom level are very, very high. And when these schemes like Help to Buy, and which we discussed, are not really helpful at all, it's a way of people finding accommodation, maybe saving up towards that first deposit and that kind of thing. So it could be a very positive thing, I think. But again, in sort of pandemic land, it's worth bearing in mind, for example, that in Cambridge, where I'm based, 20,000 students have suddenly left, and they've said they're going to be gone for 5 months, and they are querying whether it's appropriate that they should or shouldn't pay rent, given that the universities have said to them, well, you're not here, so you're not going to have to pay us. But obviously the universities have got deeper pockets, and those rooms are not going to be repurposed for anything else anyway while the guys are away. So in the street where I live, which I fondly call HMO Street, because there's only about 4 or 5 of us who are actually residents here, and I originally bought this one as an HMO, although it was never used as such, but it's a very nice house. There are so many to let signs in my street at the moment that you wouldn't believe. And in the house next to me on that side, so there was a bit of work going on, and bits of plasterboard being put up and hammering and things. And now families moved in, so that's moved away from presumably they've taken down all the smokes or something, and put nice doors in there for a change, and it's completely transformed. So the HMO isn't the sort of panacea that it once was.
Well, I think something you mentioned, this is HMO conversions, and something that I think a lot of people naively miss when doing a conversion. If, for argument's sake, you're building a HMO and you're making them several en-suites, and you put in showers into all of these en-suites, if you've got a 15mm copper water pipe coming into the building, and now you've got 6 people or 5 people all trying to jump in the shower at the same time, they get a dribble come out the water tap. So what you actually need to do is look at the infrastructure supplying the building, and either create reservoir tanks, which then brings in salmonella issues, or introduce wider bore pipes or multiple streams into the property. Because the last thing you want to do is develop this flashy, beautiful looking HMO, which finish wise looks perfect, but practical use wise is unworkable, because they can't all get up and go to work at 8 a.m. in the morning having a shower, because the water comes out as a dribble. How your phone switchboard's just going to light up with complaints. So
Absolutely.
do it right, and spec it right, otherwise you'll end up with problems.
Absolutely, and I used to deal with that with mine with cylinders, and there'd be sort of like long, thin corridors with cupboards either side of the fireplaces. And the first time I had a plumber there, and this is why it's not always good to work not to be on site when stuff's going on. So he put a great big fat cylinder right across this corridor that would people have to go down, and it worked beautifully in terms of supplying hot water. But you couldn't go past it, and he'd blocked off the gangway to 2 rooms. So people often look at it from their perspective. So I had to ring him up, and I said, "What can we do?" And after a sort of bit of these guys know the answer, but it's a question of you have to ask them the right questions. And we came up with bullet cylinders. So we had a bunch of these 6-foot bullet cylinders, which are perfect, all sort of wired up in parallel or whatever. And so there was a lot of hot water. That is one way to do it. And it's not enough just to put 22mm pipes under the hallways and things to bring the water in. It's got to be warm water. You might or might not be having little electric power showers in the room, but in my case I've always had massive capacity boilers able to produce a lot of hot water, but then you need to store it, and it needs to be made available at the right time, and it's a kind of bit of a trial and error thing, but once you get it right, then you can rinse and repeat if HMO is your strategy. But similarly with all these kinds of things, then you have to think about what you're going to provide in the communal areas to provide just enough, but not enough to get disputes going on about who should watch what on the telly and this kind of thing. So I used to give them little tellies in all their rooms, but tellies are a bit passé now, so now they need Wi-Fi in all the rooms and this kind of. So people's expectation changes, and you always have to keep your finger on the pulse and stay slightly ahead of the curve. And I think probably the most disastrous thing to not have in an HMO, far more important than hot water, would be no Wi-Fi or slow Wi-Fi. So this means that you're going to have to have a higher capacity than your ordinary domestic broadband connection, because 6 people are all going to be streaming Netflix at the same time.
I was going to say exactly the same as you there. And if you've got 6 people streaming movies, they either get a lower quality movie or freeze framing. And again, your phone line lights up with people with complaints, and that's not what you need. And
And I have to say that my internet at home here, because I live in HMO Street, has been blisteringly fast of late since everybody went. And I'm now getting the advertised speeds, like for the first time ever, 110 down and 10 up is just exactly what I paid for. So, I mean, that's a call up for the books, isn't it, really? It's like, it's a credit. If it was the water supply in your tap, it's like turning the bath tap on and having it go drip, drip, drip and saying, oh, well, that's fit for purpose, which some might argue it isn't.
No.
But anyway, enough of my gripes.
So you're basically hoping that they don't come back to university quite quick so that your internet stays better. So
Oh yes, that's my strategy that I'm banking on, because it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good, and having blistering fast internet is terrific. Can't tell you, and high definition. But I believe YouTube and Facebook and everything degraded their video quality, and possibly Netflix as well. They've knocked 25% off the quality to reduce the amount of bandwidth. And you know, but since I've only got a tiny little computer screen to watch it on anyway, I'm not watching it on a 68-inch 4D or whatever it is screen, whatever it's called. It doesn't matter too much.
there you go. Superb.
The fact that I don't even know what it's called means that I don't know what I'm missing.
Well, where does this lead us into? We've done HMOs, HMO conversions, and this must be leading us somewhere, David.
We're still in the HMO game. We might end up in the... actually, we've got one more after HMOs, but HMOs commercial refinance, because when you're valuing a property, and it kind of depends where you are in the country, really, that there'll be some areas where it's more cost effective to value these HMOs as a commercial entity. There'll be some where the bricks and mortar value is kind of enormous. And this varies around the country, and also the attitude of lenders will vary as well as to their appetite for it. But if we think of an HMO as a business, I mean, you know, if we're going way up north, that's way beyond even Northampton, you know, and Rugby in your neck of the woods. If we go even further towards Hadrian's Wall, which is a scary thought, then you know you can buy. I know. Oh, it is. They have blizzards in July, so I'm told. But then, you know, if you're getting a great big 5-bed Victorian house for 100,000, it might be worth a bit more on the basis of the rent multiples coming in, and which is terrific, you know, in that sense. And so it's always worth having a good broker and seeing what the options are. But the options are not the same throughout the country, and the multiples that lenders will accept are not the same. And so it's important to note that these are sort of geographic specific, and that stuff changes. So that's why you need a good broker, because they'll always tell you what the latest thing is. And what I normally do with my broker, here's a little aside, is we'll have a good long sort of 15-20 minute chat, and I write things on little yellow post-it notes that he tells me. This is literally what I do, and then I sort of geek away and turn them into little spreadsheets, and I fiddle with the little spreadsheets until the numbers in my little spreadsheets exactly match the case studies that my broker told me. And then I can plug in other numbers, and I don't have to bother him all the time, in other words. And so then I can find a different property with some different numbers. I plug in the numbers that he told me. It gives me some results. And then when I'm ready to, and you know, he appreciates that I do that. When I'm ready to move forward, I say, right, this is what I've got. This is what I want to do, as we were discussing the other day. And I make the numbers this. And then he'll look at his sophisticated one and he'll go, how did you know that? And I go, well, you know.
Very smart. Very, very smart. And I think one of the things to look at with HMO commercial finance that some people perhaps might make a mistake on is generally majority of lenders don't offer commercial finance if you just took a 4-bed house and just took a fire door on and said, well, it's a HMO. That wouldn't classify. What they're looking for to secure the commercial finance is an adaptation to the property that means that it's no longer a normal looking house. If you were to put that back on the market, a family wouldn't move back in, because you wouldn't have an ensuite, for example, in your lounge, and you wouldn't have an ensuite in the dining room as well. So they're looking for you to modify the property from its default in order to secure yourself a commercial valuation. So it's worth looking at that and considering where we're going with it. So don't assume, because assume makes an ass out of you and me.
That's an excellent point, and Andrew, and yeah, just putting a Yale lock on all the bedrooms and on all those sort of other things that they won't cut it. They won't cut it. And now in the time of furlough and all this sort of stuff that everybody's talking about, and people being paid to kind of sit at home at the time of recording this, it seems appropriate to look at the next strategy, which is hold steady, do nothing. And that is in itself a property strategy. Do you remember, Andrew, there used to be a program about people who were buying properties, kind of amateur people who were buying properties and sort of refurbishing a lot of the sweat equity, a lot of the work they were doing themselves. They were taking 2 or 3 years to do it because they could only do it at weekends, and when they'd sort of pop down to the DIY centre and buy a little something. And these things were being sort of televised, and the camera crew would come back 4 years later when they were all kind of wrinkly and haggard looking because of the strain of doing it all and the sleepless nights and this kind of thing. And to be honest, the fact is that in most of these cases, the enormous profit that they revealed at the end was due to the market moving. And if you added their spend onto what they paid for the property, it was sort of neutral, really. And so these guys, and I didn't have the heart to tell them, they could have just gone off to the Bahamas for 4 years and just spent the time with the sangria, sitting on the beach and listening to the waves coming in under the shade of the palms, and they would probably have made a similar amount of money and had a lot less stress. So there comes a point in every property journey where do nothing is a strategy. So kind of for flips, when the market is kind of rising like that, you could literally just buy it and do nothing. I mean, there's one of my best ones, which was literally a couple of months before the credit crunch crash in 2007, and I sold this thing I think in July or something. The crash came in the September, and I don't remember the exact dates, but I'd held this thing for about 6 or 7 months. And all I did was give it a lick of paint, really, and knocked down an old lean-to toilet at the back, because that made it unmortgageable, because there was a great big crack like that between the small lean-to toilet and the main house. So what do? Do I structurally underpin the outside loo, or do I just knock it down? So, this is India. I knocked it down, I shingled over where it had been, and obviously cemented up the pipework so that nothing could go in there and contaminate anything. And that was about it, really, a lick of paint. And the way to stop the old cement from destroying all the pipework is just to put one of those plastic, quite tough bags that builders have to take sand around in. So you stuff that in the hole, fill it with cement, cut it off, shingle over the top, but that was a very effective way of sealing it. It was watertight and everything. We tested it exhaustively. I mean, I'm not suggesting that's necessarily a sort of builder strategy tip to do, but what I'm saying is that was kind of like the minimum. I never had it. I actually stayed in touch with the people who bought it. They never had any issues with it. And then obviously we put paving slabs over it and all that kind of thing, so there's some structural soundness. We made a nice patio where the loo had been. Effectively I hadn't done anything to this, and I had bought it for, I think it was 300 and sold it for 420 about 8 months later in one of the sharpest rising markets that I've ever experienced. But essentially I hadn't really done anything to it. That's my point. And yes, lick of paint.
Well, you said to me you'd painted it, and a bit like that TV program Changing Rooms that used to be on. Obviously, that lick of paint, it was a designer painter, Michelangelo or somebody, so, or could have been a Banksy. So they've uplifted the value.
Well, interestingly enough, back then I was a great fan. We're talking about, when was that? That was the sort of early 2000s. I was a great fan of Magnolia, but going back to my sort of landlordy background, and I had quite a discussion with the decorator, and he made me paint it all white. But we had a feature wall long before there were experts going around telling you to do that, and he chose some kind of pastel green colour in the master bedroom. And I said, "What on earth is that?" He said, "Trust me," and I did, because I'm always, we always listen to the professionals, and this guy was working a lot in the area, so he knew what was wanted. So probably most of the uplift came from the white and the pastel feature wall.
Well, that's brilliant. That is brilliant. And if only we could paint a building and it uplifts the value by so much, that would be brilliant. Well, David, we've run out of time, and I can see the zombies are coming back again. Shall we make a run for it and get out of here, and we'll see you next week? Bye for now.